The 61st movie in the animated Disney canon, as well as Disney's first foray into non-superhero science fiction since the early 2000s, Strange World was something of a black sheep before it was ever even released. And I'll be honest with you, when I first heard of its announcement, I was actually pretty interested in seeing it. But then the reviews started coming in, and some people loved it simply because it had an openly gay character, while others automatically hated it because they felt it was political, and even the critics seemed largely unimpressed by it. And all of this talk, combined with my own personal problems with Disney and Pixar's direction in recent years, somewhat marred my initial interest in it. And as a result, I wasn't exactly in any hurry to watch it. But when I finally did, I tried to go in with as much of an open mind as possible, as I do with most movies I watch, and tried to push all of those various controversies out of my head. And let me just say, I still can't honestly ever see this as ranking alongside Disney's greatest movies. And just a quick spoiler warning before we go any further, because I will be discussing major plot points from the movie in this video. So if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, I would highly suggest you click off this video and come back to it another day. But that being said, the first question I want to try and answer here is, does this movie really deserve all of the hate it's gotten? With some even calling it one of the worst movies ever made. No. I can honestly say that I don't believe this is anywhere close to one of the worst movies ever made. Trust me, I have seen some truly horrendous films in my time, and they make Strange World look like a masterpiece by comparison. So, needless to say, I wouldn't call it a form of torture to sit through it either. Just more of a waste of time. And that's honestly a major problem here. I wouldn't call it bad so much as unremarkable in every way possible. And if there's one thing that you can arguably feel for a movie that's worse than hatred, it would be almost total apathy for it, which is pretty much exactly what I felt. This movie doesn't do anything that hasn't been done already, and the one interesting concept they bring up is completely wasted. To put it simply, this movie has been described as a combination of Journey to the Center of the Earth and Fantastic Voyage. And while that is pretty accurate, let me just say, I've seen both those movies, and I can gladly and wholeheartedly tell you that your time is better spent watching either of those instead. They are 100 times more fulfilling and fun to watch, and are some of the greatest early sci-fi movies out there, especially the 1959 version of Journey to the Center of the Earth. Seriously, that movie manages to capture the wonder and awe of exploration 1,000,000 times better than this movie does. And they spend most of that movie in caves and only encounter a few giant lizards. And that leads right into one of the biggest problems I personally have with the movie. Its animation. Seriously, this just doesn't impress me. It's generic, it's all been done before, and it doesn't look in any way creatively inspired. I mean, could you imagine what this might have looked like in traditional animation if somebody like Richard Williams was at the helm? Can you imagine how alien and unique, yet beautiful it might have looked if it had been made during the Disney Renaissance? I mean, what is Disney trying to prove with making all these CGI movies so detailed? That they can make CGI look just as good as the real thing? Okay, congratulations Disney, you've done it. Can you please make a traditionally animated movie with an extremely over-the-top and pure evil villain now? I'm getting sick of all these mature CGI stuff masquerading as kids' entertainment. But that aside, what's even worse than the landscapes is the characters. I mean, take one look at the main cast and tell me that everyone, with the exception of Jaeger Clade, doesn't look like slightly altered versions of the cast from Encanto. Mirden and Castello, in particular, look just like Dolores and Louisa, with only the slightest alterations made to them, to the point that whenever I saw them in trailers, I was referring to them by their names from Encanto. Now listen, I know that Disney is no stranger to reusing animation, but one thing they hardly ever did was reuse models for their characters. It's just not Disney to do that. They always tried to make sure that their characters looked distinct from each other, even in completely separate movies. I might even go as far as to say that these character designs are proof in a nutshell that Disney is losing their identity as a company. And that's another thing, because this doesn't really feel like a Disney movie either. Now, I know that I've accused certain Disney movies in the past of feeling more like Pixar movies than Disney, but Strange World doesn't really feel like a Pixar movie either. In that regard, it's really a total mess. It doesn't feel like it was made for Disney, made for Pixar, made for children, or made for adults, really. In all honesty, I don't know what this is or what it's supposed to feel like. It's not like Treasure Planet or Atlantis the Lost Empire, where the science fiction elements are blended together with that typical Disney feeling pretty well. Really, the best way I can describe it is feeling like a pretty hard science fiction movie written by somebody who has no or only a basic understanding of the genre. Now, I'm not saying that was actually the case. That's just the best way I can describe the vibe it gives off, because it's certainly not Disney. Alright, so with all of that out of the way, and sorry if that went on too long, I just had to get all that out of the way first, there's the actual plot. Now, just for a brief summary first, Strange World takes place on a faraway planet where a man named Searcher Clade discovers a wonderful, useful energy source. But when that source is threatened, his family and a government team must travel deep inside their planet in order to restore it. And along the way, they come across Searcher's long-lost father, causing old family wounds and tension to start boiling over between the generations. Now, let me just start by saying, this is the third movie from the same creative management at Disney in a row with no villain and to instead focus on family conflict with pretty heavy themes. Though I'll be honest, I think it might have handled the whole thing between Searcher and his father better than either Encanto or Turning Red did as far as maturity goes. Because in essence, their conflict is actually dumbed down a bit so that kids can understand it, especially as there's clearly somebody who's more in the wrong from the start in this case, with that being Jaeger. But that still doesn't mean it isn't too theme-oriented or that the conflict is exactly engaging. To keep it short, Encanto might be more brutal and realistic in its approach, but it's also a lot more compelling in the way it presents its problems. And honestly, I think a lot of the issues not only this movie, but Disney as a whole has had comes down to a line spoken by Jaeger when he and Searcher are playing Ethan's board game. Because both of them simply want to kill pests, not understanding that it's not that kind of game. And when Ethan points this out to them, and specifically that there is no bad guy, Jaeger goes, "There's no bad guy? That's just bad writing." And it's like, I see what you're doing there, Disney. But here's the thing. That line ends up betraying just how much Disney doesn't get their own formula anymore. Because I'll be the first person to say it. As a man who's written books and watched tons of movies, a story not having a villain doesn't automatically make it bad. There are plenty of ways to tell a good story without a bad guy, and anybody who says otherwise clearly doesn't understand storytelling. But at the same time, a bad guy, both in terms of story and themes, usually makes it a lot easier and more effective to tell that story, especially in a kids' movie where presenting black and white morality is very important. And Disney's inability to understand that maybe a villain would have made some of their more recent movies easier for children and even adults to understand pretty much tells you everything you need to know. But that's a video for another day. Let me get back on topic here. Okay, so to put it simply, the conflict between Searcher and his father isn't all that engaging, mostly because all the characters pretty much fall flat, even if the voice acting is pretty good and you can tell they're at least trying to make it work. But Ethan in particular comes across as pretty selfish at times, and what doesn't help is his constant running into dangerous and uncharted territories. Seriously, he's lucky he didn't get somebody killed with his extreme impulsiveness. But that being said, I guess it's time I should address the elephant in the room. And to put it simply, his whole crush thing is handled so awkwardly that it doesn't matter if Diazo was a boy or a girl. Seriously, I am so glad I wasn't in a theater when I saw that, because that was one of the most cringeworthy and clumsily handled introductions I have ever seen. It's like the writers clearly believe that it's a big deal, but are trying to act like it isn't a big deal. And it's like, Disney, make him gay. I really don't care. But don't handle it like that. Seriously, they handled Hugo's attraction to Esmeralda's male goat in The Hunchback of Notre Dame better than this. But even with all of that, there was still stuff about the movie that was good, or at the very least, not bad. Splat was about the only character that came across as intended, and was a little funny overall. Like the scene where Jaeger gets angry shouting about a guy he doesn't even know. The movie does offer a laugh or two. And I'll be honest, I did like the part where Jaeger came back to help Searcher at the end. If you ask me, that might be the only emotional moment in the entire movie that landed the way it was supposed to, and did come across as a bit touching. But I think the best part was easily the reveal that their world is actually the back of a giant sea turtle. Honestly, I find the concept behind that truly fascinating, especially because it's rooted in so many cultural myths, but is one you hardly ever see in science fiction. The idea that intelligent, sentient creatures came into being on top of some giant creature so ancient it created its own living environment on its back. Only they completely squandered it for the sake of allegory. And on that topic, the environmental message is way too obvious here. The Earth is not a living being, and the physical planet can't and will not get sick and die if you turn on a light switch. I mean, it's just so obvious what they're trying to say here, and is so preachy about it that it's impossible to take seriously. And also, what is this obsession with plot twists? If you ask me, that premise, them living on the turtle's back, could have made for a much better movie on its own. Maybe explore the history of where the turtle came from first, then show how life and self-aware beings came to be on its shell, and then when they do finally find out the truth of their existence, how do they react to it? How does the turtle feel about it? Do they approve of this coexistence? Do both sides try to benefit the other so as to make each other's existence as ideal as possible? Or do some humans want to abuse it for their own gain? Is the turtle self-aware and full of wisdom with plenty of advice to give? Or is it just a giant animal? I'm telling you, there was so much potential behind this concept, it's not even funny. and they wasted it all on a generic plot and an over-the-top climate allegory that doesn't really work when you stop and think about it. Honestly, as a writer myself, it genuinely pains me to see such a potentially great and unique concept so underused. Because I don't like to toot my own horn, but I know that if I was in that writing room when discussing concepts, I could have done so much more with that idea. But, for the moment anyway, I digress. Alright, so to put it simply, I believe that Strange World is an extremely flawed movie that pretty much fails to convey anything that it's trying to. The characters are pretty much just there, and their personal problems aren't all that engaging. The plot is too bland and allegorical, and the animation is pretty unimpressive. So while I wouldn't say it's quite as bad as, say, Ralph Breaks the Internet, I might just have to place it alongside something like Raya and the Last Dragon, which similarly fails at pretty much everything it's trying to do. Though I already made a separate video on that, which you can find a link in the description to, so I won't get into that here. In the end, my point is that I'm not planning on watching this again anytime soon, and that I'd personally recommend any of the movies that inspired this over the movie itself. But that being said, I still haven't given up hope that maybe Disney will one day get their act together and create a masterpiece worthy of Walt Disney's greatest work. Though I can't really say that this movie did anything to justify that hope, but I still haven't given up on them just yet. Alright, I think that pretty much covers everything. So now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Strange World is one of Disney's weaker movies, or do you believe it's their latest masterpiece and that I don't know what I'm talking about? Please feel free to let me know in the comments. And remember, this is simply my opinion on the movie, and you don't have to agree with it. This video is only meant to reflect how I personally felt about it. And if you think I'm wrong, that's totally fine, and I've got no issue with you if you do. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.